This is Amud Yomi, Gemara and Berachos, Daf Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph. Apologies, we fell a little bit behind. B'siyat D'Shmaya, we are catching back up. So we're on the bottom of Mem Amud Beis, and we ended off with a very long and lengthy list of all different types of grapes, in which we got into from the fact that the Mishnah listed something called noivlois, that the Mishnah spoke about chometz, noivlois, and goivai, locusts, and the Mishnah taught us that these were all shahakol. So we got involved in what were noivlois, and in the discussion of noivlois, we segued into figuring out a whole list of dates. It says the Gemara, Bishlav Amar Bushli de Kamra. If you hold that dates, that noivles are dates that were burnt by the sun. This is why the Mishnah says that the kalin, that the most lenient of all the fruits with regard to demai, speaking uda butter, which means that if it's a suffix, that if we have these novlos dates that come from an amaretz, they're potter, havadayin, they're going to be chayiv. But if you know for sure, it's only because an amaretz might have been. There's a suffix. But if it's a vadai that he didn't give meiser, truma, etc., then you would have to. Elaman damar tamri dezika, but according to Mandam, that says what are novlos? They're not the sun-burnt dates, the wind-blown dates. Vadon, then the ones which are vadai chayiv in meiser chayov. Hefkera ninu. Why are they chayiv? But they are hefker. They're wind-blown dates. They're blown off and they just do their own thing. So why would it apply that they're chayiv in meiser? Says the Gemara Chmayaskinan. Shasayin gairin. We're dealing with a case in which the person who picked up these wind-blown dates made a pile. Since he made a pile, therefore he makes a chayiv of meiser. Yankiv. Haleket, Shicha, Peya, Shasan, Gairin, that the ani made into a Gairin Hokbu La Maisa, the Maisa of a son Legairin, that Maisa is that which makes it chayiv in meiser. Igad Yamri, at the very end of Mem Amud Aleph, as you turn over to Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, says the Gemara. Now the Ikad Yamri is the exact opposite. If you hold they're referring to as Tarmid Zika, that's why our Mishnah says Noivlais Vahasam correlate tomorrow. Whereas the Mishnah and Demai calls them tomorrow. Elaman Damar Bushli Kamri, according to Band Amr, that says they're the ones that are burnt by the sun. Says the Gemara, tomorrow. Why there are two different words used? They should both be the same thing. Says the Gemara, or both noivleis. What would the reason be that by us we use the word noivleis and over there we use the word tomorrow? They should both be the same thing. Says the Gemara, kasha. So according to Amri, we end off with a kasha. Now we're on Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. We are 5 lines down, quoting the next part of the Mishnah. Now we get involved in the Kedima in Berachos. Rav Yudah said, you have many minim in front of you. What do? Shivas minim come first. Chachamim said, Eze mehen sheyirtze. Omar Ula. Comes like Ula and says, let's understand with a little bit more depth what exactly is the machlokes. Machlokes, mishabir chayseya and shavos. A very important, every Gemara is important, but there's added importance over here, as this will bring us to Allah Lamaisa. When you have in front of you watermelon and rimon and grapes, what bracha do you make first? Says Ula, when the machlokes is the Mishnah, whether Shivas Aminim comes first, is mishabir chayseya and shavos, is when all the brachas are the same. The Rav Yehuda Savrim in Shiva Adif. Says Rav Yehuda, Zayin minim come first, Rav Savrim in Chaviv Adif. So at the root machlokes, the same bracha, you have grapes which are ha'etz, and you have zaitim which are ha'etz. You have tamarim which are ha'etz. That zayin minim. So says the Gemara, machlokes mi b'shechaseyem shavois. The Rav Yehuda Savard min Shiva Adif, Rabbanan Savrim min Chaviv Adif. That's Rav Yehuda says you make the eights on the olive, and then, for example, let's say you have olives and apples. That's the easiest case. So you have an eights on the olive and eights on the apple. Says Rav Yehuda, the eights comes first. That's the example that Rashi gives. When the brachas are not the same, then divrei hakol, everyone holds varach el zeh, v'chayzim varach el zeh. Everyone holds that you make a bracha on this, then you make a bracha on this. That that you're going to make whichever bracha you want. Says the Gemara, because they're separate brachas. What does Rashi say? Rashi says, "Ein a bracha achas poiterton." We're not discussing one bracha exempting the other, which really brings out what is the root of the machlekes is when one bracha is going to be made and not the other. So my ha'itz that I'm making on the apple versus the olive, which comes first? So Yehuda says the zayin minim comes first because now your ha'itz is elevated. However, if you're making two different brachas, therefore they're not bothering each other, then there is no machlekes. Asks the Gemara Meisei, Lefanim Stein v'Zayis, you radishes and olives, Hadama and eitz, Mevarach al Atznain, Upater as a Zayis. So even though Atznain is Hadama and a Zayis is a eitz, says the Gemara, Mevarach al Atznain, you make a Hadama, as we learned that Hadama could pater the eitz, as trees grow in the ground. So says the Gemara, you make the Hadama and you pater the eitz. Part of the Zayis. Answers the Gemara, that's only with its 9 is the Iker, and the 8 is only a subordinate, a Tafel. That's when one will part to the next. Yachi asks Gemara, Maseifa. Look down to the Bryce, or review doing Berachos 41a Shiva. Leslie, review the Tanan. What does Rav Yehuda mean when he says you make a bracha on the Zayis in this case? Is Rav Yehuda arguing with all Iker v'Tafel? Chitema. And if you're going to suggest Hachanami Delesle, and if you're going to say that in such a case, if Yehuda does not hold that we're talking about a case of Iker and Tafel, if the Zayis is there because of the Sinain, then so you see Rav Yehuda does agree to Iker v'Tafel. So how can you say that the machlekes? So what exactly is the machlekes of Yehuda and Kama? Is it Tafel or is it not? Says the Gemara La'ilam, really, I'll tell you, we're discussing a case with Sinain Iker Askinan. We're discussing a case where the Sinain is indeed the Iker. V'chi pligi, we're smack in the middle of the Amud. The first line is pligi. So what's the machlekes pligi? We got to add in some words to the brisa and get some clarity as to what's going on. Hayulafan of Zayis, Sinain v'Zayis, Varchas Nain, Upaiter Zayis. When do you make the Adam on the Tznain and the Panthers the Olive? Keshat Tznain Iker, when the Tznain is the Iker. Aval Einat Tznain Iker. But let's say the Tznain is not the Iker. And rather, you're eating the olive because you like the olive. It's not just a tafel. Divrei hakol, then everyone is going to agree. Mevarech al zeh, v'chayzer mevarech al zeh. They're going to make two brachas as one will not pater the other. Ushnei minim ba'alma sheberchasein shavais. But, continues the brisa, in a case that we have two minim with the same bracha, like our original example of what? An olive and an apple, then Mavarch Alizim and Sheir says, say the Chachamim, you're not patering each other, you can make whichever bracha you want. Rav Yehuda Aimer says, Rav Yehuda, no, Mavarch Alazayis, why? Shazayis mi min Shiva, because the Zayis is min Shiva, and since the Zayis is min Shiva, says Rav Yehuda, that comes first, and then it comes out that this machlekes in the brisa between Rav Yehuda and the Chachamim is a carbon copy machlekes of Rav Yehuda and the Chachamim that we learned in our Mishnah. Continues the Gemara. Pligi baravami Rav Yitzchak Nafcha, quoting him machlekes Amarayim. First one line is Ami, about 25 lines from the bottom. Pligi baravami Rav Yitzchak Nafcha, Chad Amar machlekes b'shvei and Shavais. Do you have min Shiva? Do Rabbanan have min Chavav? Like we just learned. Aval b'shem b'chazei and Shavais. That's one way of learning, which is the way that we just learned. Even if the brachas are not the same, Nami, machlekes, it is the same machlekes. Says the Gemara, everyone can anticipate. If they're arguing when the brachas are the same, then I understand. What is the machlekes? Meaning, if Berachos Shabbos, we understand like we've been learning the whole time since the top of the Amud, then it's the machlekes like we've been saying, that one bracha is pattering, and therefore, do you make that ha'etz on the olive, or do you make that ha'etz on the apple? We understand that. But if you're telling me, b'she'ein Berachos Shabbos, that is machlekes, even when they're separate brachas. What's the machlekes? Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yirmiyah lehaktim. Of course, you're going to make both brachas. Question just is, which comes first? And this is probably a detail that's been bothering everyone. Because at the top of the Amud, he said, b'she'ein Berachos and Shabbos, make both brachas. Shkayach. But which first? That's exactly what the Gemara is saying right now. Says Rav Yirmiyah, lahaktim. Amar Rav Yosef, Rav Yitzchak. Call ha mukdam be pasuk zeh mukdam le bracha. Whichever is earlier in the pasuk is earlier for a bracha. What does that mean? Shenamar, with regard to the zayiminim, eretz. First comes chit, wheat, saira, barley, gefen, grapes, and that's why my original example of grapes was not good. Teina, figs. That's what we moved over to Rashi. Apples. Rima and pomegranate and eretz is shemen ude bash. It says the Gemara. With this we conclude, Upliga de Rav Nasan. And this then argues with Rav Nasan, Rav Chanan, excuse me. Da'amar Rav Chanan, kol ha'pasuk kula lishur nemara. This pasuk is all coming to teach us shiurin. It's not teaching us kedima and brachas, but rather it's teaching us shiurin. We'll stop over here. Well, in the next year, we'll go into how the pasuk is teaching us shiurim according to Rav Chanan.